My friends, let us come together for a moment of stillness. Let us set aside the long history of effort, striving, petition, and fear that has so often been called prayer. Let us place down the weight of everything we have been taught about reaching out to a God who seems far away, uncertain, unresponsive. And let us open ourselves to something deeper, something quieter, something far more intimate than words or ritual can ever convey. For centuries, men and women have prayed with great sincerity. They have prayed with tears, prayed with hope, prayed with desperation. They have prayed long prayers and short prayers, prayers of repetition and prayers of pleading. And yet, for so many, prayer has felt empty, hollow, a call that receives no answer, a movement that yields no presence. Why is this so? Is it because God is silent? Is it because God withholds? Is it because our prayers are unworthy or insufficient? No, my friends, none of these are true. Prayer seems unanswered for one reason only. We have prayed from a false premise. We have prayed to a God we imagined was separate from ourselves. We have spoken into the heavens as though the divine were somewhere beyond us, hidden behind the clouds, concealed behind the stars, listening from a distance. And all the while, the infinite whispered from the very core of our own being, asking only that we turn within. This is the great misunderstanding that silences prayer. Not the lack of faith, not the lack of sincerity, but the lack of recognition. For prayer is not an act of reaching outward at all. Prayer is not a cry to a far-off deity. Prayer is not begging, persuading, or pleading with a power that must be convinced to intervene in our affairs. Prayer, in the spiritual sense taught by the Master, is recognition. Recognition of a presence already here, already alive, already the very essence of our own being. When Jesus spoke the words, "The kingdom of God is within you," he was not offering poetry. He was not speaking symbolically. He was revealing the secret of true communion. He was telling mankind that God is not found through distance, effort, or persuasion. God is found in the quiet awareness of the invisible presence at the center of our consciousness. But because we have looked outward, because we have searched across the world, across the sky, across the pages of doctrine and belief, we have overlooked the one place where God actually is. And so prayer becomes silent, not because God is silent, but because we are speaking into the wrong direction. Imagine, if you will, a man standing in a darkened room, calling out for light. He pleads, he cries, he searches the corners of the room for a candle, a lamp, a flame, but the light is not in the corners. It is not in the walls. The switch is not somewhere across the room. The light is at his fingertips. Yet, until he turns to the place where the light actually is, he remains in darkness, no matter how desperately he calls. So it is with prayer. So it is with God. We have prayed into the air and expected the answer to return through the air. But God does not dwell in the outer world. God does not communicate through distance. God does not answer from the sky. God is the living presence within your very consciousness. And until prayer is turned inward, until prayer is recognized as the silent opening of the soul to the presence that is already here, prayer will feel unanswered, not because there is no answer, but because we have not yet learned how to listen. My friends, This is the beginning of our journey today. To gently release the old idea of a God who must be reached and awaken to the truth of a God who is already closer than our own breath, nearer than our own heartbeat, present in the very awareness with which we hear these words. Let us set aside every concept of prayer that involves effort, persuasion, or distance. Let us forget, for a time, the forms and formulas, the phrases and rituals, and let us open ourselves to the possibility that true prayer begins in silence, in stillness, in the recognition that God is not a being we seek, but a presence we acknowledge. This is the first step. The first shift, the first turning of the heart toward the kingdom within. We will walk further into this truth together. But for now, rest in this simple understanding. Prayer is not asking God to come to you. Prayer is the realization that God is already here and now. My friends, let us go deeper. For if prayer has felt silent, if communion has felt dim or uncertain, it is because humanity has rested on one great misunderstanding. The belief in a God who exists somewhere other than where we are. This belief is the root of all spiritual struggle. It is the foundation of fear, guilt, separation, and the endless effort to reach upward to a presence we imagine is not yet here. Let me say this plainly. The greatest barrier to spiritual realization is the belief that God is distant. This belief has shaped the prayers of nations, the rituals of religions, and the inner lives of countless sincere souls. Yet it is a belief without foundation in spiritual truth. From childhood, we are taught subtly or explicitly that God is above us, beyond us, outside of us. We are encouraged to imagine God seated on a throne, living in a heaven far removed from the world of human experience. And from such an image, prayer naturally becomes an attempt to bridge an impossible gap. We cry out to the heavens because we have been conditioned to believe that God is somewhere up there. We kneel with heads bowed toward the ground because we believe that God must descend from beyond. We speak words into the air, hoping they will be carried across the vastness of divine distance. But my friends, there is no such distance. There never has been. The infinite does not dwell in remote spaces. Spirit is not bound by geography. Omnipresence does not exist in some places and not in others. If God is truly omnipresent, then God must be present exactly where you are. And if God is present where you are, then the belief in a distant God is the only veil that hides the presence from your awareness. It is not God who is absent. It is our concept of God that has wandered away. Let us look gently and honestly at this illusion of distance. When you believe God is far, you begin to feel unworthy. You begin to imagine that you must travel toward him through effort, through moral struggle, through religious performance. You begin to imagine that you must earn the right to be heard. And so prayer becomes a striving, a reaching, a stretching of the soul towards something it believes is beyond its grasp. But what if the very foundation of this struggle is false? What if God has never been apart from you, not for a single moment of your life? What if the presence you seek is the very life that animates you, the very consciousness that knows these words, the very being that looks out through your eyes? When this is understood, the entire scaffolding of fear collapses, unworthiness dissolves, spiritual striving falls away, and prayer begins to transform not into effort, but into awareness. But until this illusion is recognized for what it is, the mind will continue to seek a God elsewhere. And in that seeking, it will overlook the presence that is here. You may search the scriptures. You may search the world religions. You may explore every spiritual tradition on earth and still miss the truth if the mind insists that God must be found somewhere outside your own being. This is why theological debate has never brought spiritual realization. This is why ritual has never guaranteed inner peace. This is why millions pray with hope but feel no response. They are praying across a distance that does not exist. They are reaching for a God who has never been separate from them. Listen carefully to this. Separation from God is the only illusion. Union with God is the only reality. The task before the seeker is not to find God, not to reach God, not to attract God, but to awaken from the dream that God is absent. The presence you call God is the very breath that sustains you, the life that never leaves you, the silence beneath your thoughts, the love that cannot be taken away. There is no distance between you and God except the distance created by thought, and thought is not reality. Thought is not truth. Thought is only a shadow on the surface of the mind. And the moment you turn within, the moment you become still, the moment you release the idea of a God who lives elsewhere, you begin to feel what has always been here. A warmth, a stillness, a quiet sense of companionship, a subtle but unmistakable presence that does not come from outside, but rises from within your own being. This is the beginning of spiritual awakening, not the finding of God, but the recognition that God was never lost. The Master's teachings were not invitations to search the heavens. They were invitations to awaken the heart. The kingdom of God is within you, not will be, not could be, not might be, when you become worthy. It is within you now, always, eternally. When this truth begins to dawn, prayer is transformed from questioning into communion, from pleading into resting, from fear into peace, and the illusion of distance, which has weighed upon humanity for centuries, begins to dissolve like mist in the morning light. We will explore this further, but let us pause here, for in this stillness, something in you already knows the truth. God is not far. God is not apart. God is not elsewhere. God is the presence within your own consciousness, awaiting recognition. And now, my friends, as we rest in this understanding that God is not distant, let us turn our attention to the one who revealed this truth with unmatched clarity, the Master, Jesus Christ. For if we are to understand prayer, we must return to his teachings, not as they have been explained through centuries of theology, but as they were spoken from the depth of spiritual realization. We must hear his words not as history, but as living truth, as instruction meant for the awakening of consciousness, not the performance of religion. Listen to how Jesus spoke of prayer. He did not say, "Call upon God who is far from you." He did not say, "Reach upward toward a deity separated from your life." He did not say, "Convince God, persuade God, or beg God." No, he said, "When thou prayest, enter thy closet. Pray to thy Father which is in secret. The kingdom of God is within you. I and the Father are one." Everything he taught about prayer pointed us inward. Everything. Not one instruction directed humanity toward an external God. Not one prayer he offered was an act of petition. Not one word suggested distance. Jesus prayed not to bring God near, but to rest in the presence that was already there. He entered silence. He withdrew from crowds. He went into the mountain, into the garden, into the solitary place, not to escape the world, but to return to the inner sanctuary where the Father was always abiding. The closet of which he spoke was not a room of wood and stone. It was the innermost chamber of consciousness, the silent, sacred space where the personal sense of self dissolves and the presence of God is felt as one's very own being. This is prayer, not words, not supplication, recognition of the Father within, of the life that cannot be separated from your life, of the Spirit that breathes you, moves you, lives you. When Jesus prayed, he was not informing God of need. He was not asking God to change external conditions. He was not pleading for intervention. He prayed in order to experience the Father's presence, to become aware of the spiritual reality that is always here but unnoticed when the mind is filled with fear, desire, and the noise of the world. This is why he could say, "Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him." Consider the depth of that statement. If the Father already knows, then what purpose does asking serve? Why ask for what is already known? Why plead for what is already established in divine completeness? You see, Jesus was not instructing us to inform God of our needs. He was instructing us to silence the mind that believes in need at all and to awaken to the reality in which every need is met in the fullness of spiritual being. This is why the Master's Prayer, the Lord's Prayer, contains new asking, new pleading, new petition. It is pure recognition. Thine is the kingdom. Thine is the power. Thy will is done. It is not a prayer to bring something into being. It is a prayer that acknowledges what already is. Jesus did not say, "Let me have supply." He said, "Consider the lilies. Your Father careth for you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." He did not say, "Heal me, Father." He said, "My Father worketh, and I work." He recognized that healing was not something to be received, but something to be revealed through awareness of the Father's indwelling presence. He did not say, "Give me strength." He said, "I can of mine own self do nothing," which is to say, there is no personal strength to request. There is only divine strength to recognize. When you see prayer through this lens, the lens Jesus actually offered, the entire structure of religious prayer collapses. Prayer is not a transaction. It is not negotiation. It is not a request sent outward in hope of return. Prayer is the sacred resting in the Father's presence. It is the willingness to enter the silence and allow truth to reveal itself without the interference of the personal mind. This is why Jesus could teach with authority. This is why he could heal without effort. This is why he could face storms, crowds, suffering, betrayal, and even death with unshakable peace. He lived from the consciousness of I and the Father are one. And in that oneness, prayer becomes not a practice of reaching God, but a practice of recognizing God. This is the prayer we must learn. Not the prayer of asking, but the prayer of awareness. Not the prayer of seeking answers, but the prayer of resting in the answer that already exists. Not the prayer of outward effort, but the prayer of inward stillness. Let us pause for a moment, gently, silently, and feel the shift from asking to recognizing. This is the prayer that Jesus taught. This is the prayer that awakens the soul. This is the prayer that reveals the kingdom within. My friends, Now that we have opened our hearts to what the Master actually taught about prayer, we can look gently but truthfully at why so much of humanity's prayer has remained unanswered. It is because almost every prayer ever spoken has begun at the wrong point of consciousness. Almost every prayer has tried to address the world first and God second. Almost every prayer has attempted to fix conditions rather than recognize the presence behind them. Joel Goldsmith called this mistake the most universal error in spiritual life. He called it seeking second. To seek second means to look first at the appearance, the illness, the lack, the conflict, the fear, and then to call upon God to repair it. It means to observe the world with human eyes, and then hope that a divine power will come afterward to correct what the senses have presented. We say, God, fix this sickness. God, change this situation. God, remove this fear. God, supply this need. But notice the order of consciousness. We have already accepted the appearance as truth before we have turned to the presence. We have believed in the problem, believed in it so completely that we now ask God to overcome it. We are trying to use spirit to repair matter rather than letting spirit reveal itself as the only reality. This is seeking second. And as long as we seek second, prayer will be fruitless. Understand this clearly. What you recognize first becomes the authority in your consciousness. If you recognize the sickness first, then sickness becomes your authority and God becomes your remedy. If you recognize fear first, fear becomes your authority and God becomes your comfort. If you recognize lack first, lack becomes your authority and God becomes your supplier. But God is not a supplier. God is not a comforter in the sense of repairing what fear has created. God is not a healer in the sense of restoring what sickness has destroyed. God is the spiritual reality in which sickness, fear, and lack have no actual existence. When you ask God to change conditions, you have already surrendered truth to appearance. You are declaring the world of form to be real and the world of spirit to be secondary. But Jesus never worked this way. He did not look at the illness and then ask God to intervene. He recognized God first, and in that recognition, the illusion dissolved. He did not treat disease. He recognized wholeness. He did not pray for supply. He recognized completeness. He did not pray for protection. He recognized oneness. The miracle was not in the asking. The miracle was in the recognition. Let us take this slowly, for the mind may resist it. When you pray for something, you are declaring that you do not yet have it. When you pray for healing, you are declaring that sickness has reality. When you pray for safety, you are declaring that danger has power. When you pray for supply, you are declaring that lack has authority. Every petition reinforces the very condition you are trying to escape. This is seeking second, seeking God, after you have already accepted the problem. And yet the Master said, seek first the kingdom of God. Seek God first, before the fear, before the diagnosis, before the financial concern, before the emotional storm, before your human reasoning begins its frantic work. Seek God first, not as a remedy for the problem, but as the reality that renders the problem unreal. This is not positive thinking. This is not denial. This is not affirming something you hope to believe. It is a shift in consciousness. It is turning from appearance to presence. It is recognizing that the spiritual reality is primary and the visible condition is secondary. When you seek first the kingdom, which is another way of saying recognize God first, something remarkable occurs. The problem loses its authority. The fear loses its grip. The condition begins to dissolve without force, without struggle. Not because you have changed the outer world, but because you have withdrawn your belief in it. Goldsmith taught that when you recognize the presence, the so-called problem melts away in the light of reality, just as darkness melts when a lamp is lit. You do not have to fight the darkness. You only have to turn on the light. So it is with the conditions of life. We are not here to fight them. We are here to recognize the presence that renders them powerless. This is why asking does not work, not because God refuses, but because asking begins from the wrong center, the human sense of lack, fear, and separation. True prayer does not begin with asking. True prayer begins with recognizing the presence, recognizing the oneness, recognizing the spiritual reality that was here before the appearance and will remain long after the appearance is gone. Seek first the kingdom, not second, not after the fear, not after the diagnosis, not after the worry has already taken root. Seek first, and you will discover that the kingdom has already been seeking you. Let us sit for a moment in the stillness, not asking, not seeking remedies, not reaching outward, but simply recognizing where I am, God is, and that is sufficient. And now, my friends, having seen the futility of asking and the subtle trap of seeking God only after we have already bowed to appearance, we approach the great turning point, the reversal of consciousness that marks the beginning of true spiritual life. This reversal is not dramatic. It is not emotional. It is not accompanied by fireworks or visions. It is simple, quiet, gentle, but it changes everything. It is the moment when we stop looking outward for God and start recognizing the presence within. This is the reversal experienced by every mystic, every illumined soul, every man or woman who has tasted the deep peace of the Spirit. It is the shift from searching to recognizing, from effort to awareness, from seeking to being. Let us look closely, for this is the heart of the path. For so long, we have lived turned outward. We have looked to the world to tell us who we are. We have looked to circumstances to determine our well-being. We have looked to people for love, approval, guidance, security. We have looked to the body for identity, to the intellect for understanding, to our emotions for truth. But in all of this outward turning, we have neglected the one place where reality can actually be found, the silent center of our own being. The reversal is the moment we turn inward, not inward into thought, not inward into emotion, not inward into imagination, but inward into the quiet, living presence that is always here beneath the noise of the mind. This turning is not an action of the will. It is not an effort of concentration. It is not a mental technique. It is a surrender, a release, a softening, a gentle willingness to abide in the awareness that something greater than the personal self is already present. Joel Goldsmith called this recognizing the presence. Not bringing it into being, for the presence is already here. Not attracting it, for the presence cannot be absent. Not calling it, for the presence is your own life. It is simply recognizing what has always been. When you sit in silence and shift your attention inward, something begins to happen, not because you seek it, but because you are no longer interfering with it. You begin to sense a quiet aliveness, a subtle peace, a warmth that has no physical origin, a stillness that does not depend on outer conditions. You begin to feel that you are not alone, even when no one is near. You begin to sense that something is carrying you, sustaining you, breathing you. You begin to perceive an intelligence at work that is not your personal mind, an order that arises without your control, a presence that knows you more intimately than you can know yourself. This is the beginning of recognition, and recognition is the true foundation of prayer. To recognize is not to repeat phrases. It is not to affirm truths mechanically. It is not to force belief. To recognize is simply to see inwardly, quietly, without effort, that God is the very essence of your being, that the life in you is not personal but divine, that your consciousness is an instrument through which the infinite expresses itself. Once this is glimpsed, even faintly, prayer becomes entirely different. No longer do you ask for healing. You recognize that wholeness is the nature of your being. No longer do you ask for supply. You recognize that completeness is the nature of spirit. No longer do you ask for peace. You recognize that peace is the nature of the presence within. No longer do you ask for guidance. You recognize that the intelligence which formed the universe is already living in you, moving through you, directing you. Nothing is added to you. Nothing is given to you. Nothing is sent to you. You awaken to what has always been yours in truth. This is the reversal. From seeking to recognizing, from asking to resting, from looking outward to turning inward, from believing in separation to knowing oneness. And my friends, once this recognition begins, even in small ways, your inner life changes. Your outer life begins to reflect the harmony that unfolds naturally from within. But the true transformation is not in circumstances, it is in consciousness. It is the discovery that God is not something you reach. God is the presence you awaken to. Let us take a moment now, together, in shared stillness. Feel the breath move in and out, not as your breath, but as life breathing itself. Feel the awareness that listens to these words, not the mind, but the presence behind the mind. Feel the quiet space in which all thoughts rise and fall, the space that does not change. In that stillness, recognize, I am already in the presence. The presence is already in me. We are one. This is the reversal. This is the beginning of true prayer. This is the doorway to a life lived in union with the infinite. My friends, having come to the recognition that the presence is within you and that prayer is not asking but resting in this inner awareness, we now touch one of the most beautiful mysteries of the spiritual life, the mystery of grace. For once you begin to recognize God, not as a distant power to be persuaded, but as the living presence of your own being, the entire burden of life begins to lift. The strain dissolves, the effort dissolves, the need to manipulate, control, or force conditions begins to fade like a shadow in the light of dawn. Why? Because the moment you cease trying to make life conform to your will, you make room for the divine to reveal itself. This is the miracle of grace. Grace is not something God gives. Grace is the natural activity of the presence. When the human mind is still, grace is the rhythm of the infinite, expressing itself without your effort. Grace is God being God when you stop trying to be the God of your own life. You see, as long as you strive, as long as you push, as long as you attempt to change the outer world through human force, you interfere with the harmony that is already established in spiritual reality. It is as though the personal sense of self stands between you and the flowing river of truth. But the moment you become still, the moment you retreat inward, the moment you cease asking and begin recognizing, the moment you no longer impose your will upon life, grace begins to move. It moves silently. It moves without noise or announcement. It moves without struggle, without conflict, without demand, but it moves unfailingly, inevitably, harmoniously. Joel Goldsmith often said, "Grace is not something you achieve. It is something you allow." This allowing happens naturally when you abide in the awareness of the presence. Let us look at this practically. When you recognize the presence within and rest in stillness, fear loses its anchor. And without fear, the body begins to heal itself because the life within it is already whole. When you recognize the presence within, the sense of lack dissolves, not because money falls from the sky, but because you are no longer living from a consciousness of limitation. You are resting in the infinite completeness of spirit, and the outer world reorganizes to reflect that inner sufficiency. When you recognize the presence within, relationships soften. You respond not from ego, not from the desire to be right, not from historical wounds, but from the quiet love that lives beneath all human appearances. And harmony unfolds where conflict once seemed inevitable. When you recognize the presence within, confusion gives way to clarity, not through the labor of thinking, but through the quiet inner movement of intelligence that acts without your control. The right idea appears, the right direction becomes clear, the right step presents itself without strain, and all of this happens without effort, because it is not you accomplishing it. It is the activity of the presence. Spiritual healing, spiritual supply, spiritual guidance are not the result of forcing, trying, or working. They arise when the personal mind becomes still enough for the divine to express itself. Think of a pool of water. When the surface is agitated, the light cannot reflect. But when the water is quiet, perfectly still, the light reveals its beauty effortlessly. So it is with consciousness. When your mind is troubled, anxious, striving, fearful, reactive, the presence cannot reveal its harmony, not because it is absent, but because the agitation of thought prevents recognition. But when you become still, when you rest in silent acknowledgement, when you stop striving, the presence shines of its own accord. This is why the Master could rebuke storms, heal the sick, multiply bread, raise the dead, not because he possessed a supernatural power to manipulate the world, but because he lived from the consciousness in which there is no separation, no fear, no lack, no death, only the activity of the Father. He said plainly, "I do nothing of myself. The Father within me doeth the works." This is grace, not effort, but divine activity. You and I experience this same grace when we recognize the presence and abide in it, not as a method, not as a technique, not as a means to achieve results, but as the natural unfolding of reality, when the personal self is no longer interfering. My friends, when you turn inward in recognition, you begin to feel the subtle peace that has always been here. Remain there, even for a moment, and watch how life reorders itself without your command. This is true prayer. This is spiritual living, and this is how transformation occurs, not through effort, but through grace. Let us pause for a breath of silence and feel the quiet activity of the presence in this very moment. My friends, we now come to one of the most sacred elements of the spiritual path, entering the silence. Without the silence, the presence remains merely an idea. With the silence, the presence becomes a living reality, for the silence is not the absence of sound. It is not the blankness of mind. It is not the quiet that follows a busy moment. The silence is a dimension of consciousness, a state in which the personal sense of self no longer stands between you and the infinite. In this silence, you do not think of God. You do not speak to God. You do not ask God for anything. You do not even contemplate God. You simply rest in God. Goldsmith called this the practice of the presence. But let us understand what this means, for it is easily misunderstood. Many imagine that practicing the presence is a mental exercise, repeating certain truths, holding certain ideas, trying to stay focused on spiritual thoughts. But the presence cannot be practiced in thought, because the presence is not a thought. The presence is the living reality of your own being. Thought can only point to it. Thought cannot reveal it. The practice of the presence is not thinking. It is recognizing. It is turning inward gently, letting the mind grow quiet and becoming aware of the stillness behind the mind. Let me describe this simply. Sit comfortably, without strain. Close your eyes if that feels natural, and just notice that something is aware. There is an awareness that is here before thought arises. There is an awareness that remains even when thought dissolves. Like the sky behind the clouds, it is always present. Become gently aware of that awareness. Do not try to control it. Do not try to deepen it. Do not try to perfect it. Just notice it. This awareness, this quiet, observing, spacious presence is the doorway to the silence. It is not personal. It is not your awareness. It is the one presence expressing itself as your capacity to know, to witness, to be. Rest there without effort. When thoughts arise as they will, do not resist them. Do not chase them. Do not fight them. Do not try to silence them. Let them pass like ripples on the surface of a lake, knowing that beneath them lies the still depth that is never disturbed. You are not trying to reach God. You are letting go of the belief that you were ever separate. This is the silence. The silence is not an achievement. It is not a special state reserved for saints and sages. It is the natural condition of your soul, uncovered, when the noise of the personal self grows still. And it is in this silence that the presence becomes tangible, not as emotion, not as sensation, not as vision, but as a deep, quiet certainty, a knowing without words, a peace that does not depend on any condition, a light that does not shine through the eyes but through consciousness itself. Stay in this silence, even for 1 minute, and spiritual transformation begins. For in the silence, God becomes the activity of your being. In the silence, the Father within goes before you. In the silence, harmony unfolds without your effort. In the silence, solutions arise without your planning. In the silence, healing takes place without your trying to heal. This is why Goldsmith urged his students again and again, enter the silence many times a day, even if only for a few seconds, not to gain something, not to accomplish something, not to receive answers, but to abide in the recognition of the presence and to let grace do what you cannot do through human effort. Let me speak plainly. One moment of true silence is more transformative than hours of mental prayer, for in the silence, you are not using God. You are letting God use you. You become an instrument, an open channel, a place where the infinite expresses itself into form. And this is the beginning of spiritual life. Not thinking about God, not believing in God, not talking to God, but being still enough for God to reveal himself as your very being. Let us rest now for even a breath in the quiet recognition, thou art here, and I am in thee, and all is well. This is the silence. This is the presence. This is prayer in its purest form. My friends, once the silence becomes familiar, once recognition of the presence begins to dawn within you, something extraordinary and deeply natural starts to take place. Your life, your outer visible life, begins to reorganize itself according to your inner state of consciousness. This is not metaphysics. This is not mental manipulation. This is not manifestation as the world teaches it. It is simply the law of spirit. The inner is the cause, the outer is the effect. In truth, your outer life has always been the shadow of your inner state. Every fear you have carried has eventually appeared as conflict. Every belief in limitation has eventually appeared as lack. Every sense of separation has eventually appeared as loneliness. Every sense of vulnerability has appeared as illness or instability, not because God willed it, but because consciousness receives according to its own nature. Now, when the presence becomes the center of consciousness, the outer world begins to reflect that harmony, that peace, that sufficiency, not by your control, not by your planning, not by your personal effort, but by the natural unfolding of life. Let us make this clear. You do not use God to improve your outer life. God uses your inner stillness to reveal a new outer life. This is living from presence. Let us consider what this looks like in practical experience. When you awaken in the morning and your first awareness is of the presence within, even for a few seconds, you begin the day not as a personal self struggling to survive, but as spiritual being, recognizing the invisible source of your life. From that recognition, the activities of your day unfold with greater ease. People respond differently. Decisions arise naturally. Resources appear without strain. Problems dissolve before they reach their full shape, not because you are manipulating anything, but because you are not interfering with anything. The presence governs. When the presence is recognized, fear loosens its grip. And when fear is no longer the lens through which you see the world, the possibilities open. Where none seem to exist, conversations become gentler. Tension melts from your actions. The mind does not rush or panic. Even time itself seems to expand. This is living from presence. When you face difficulty, a financial concern, a relationship strain, a physical symptom, you pause. You do not attack the issue. You do not argue with it. You do not scramble for solutions. You pause. You turn within. You recognize the presence. And then you act not from fear, but from quiet inner guidance. This may take 10 seconds. It may take one breath. But that single moment of turning inward shifts the entire trajectory of your response. And because your response is different, the outcome becomes different. The outer follows the inner. When you approach your relationships from presence, you begin to see the divine in those around you. You are no longer reacting to their personalities, their moods, their histories, their appearances. You are quietly recognizing the same presence that lives within you, living as them. This recognition softens the atmosphere. It breaks the cycle of reaction. It brings clarity where confusion once lived. It brings compassion where resentment once held ground. It brings peace into conversations that once erupted in conflict, not because you forced yourself to be patient, but because the presence within you was recognized and it became the presence with which you met the world. This is living from presence. When faced with a decision, you do not analyze endlessly. You do not panic about outcomes. You do not weigh every option 100 times. You become still. You enter the silence. You feel the quiet flow of inner knowing, and you follow the impulse that arises from that stillness. This is guidance, not mental, not emotional, not reactive. It is the activity of the infinite moving through your consciousness, the same intelligence that formed galaxies, guided the prophets, and breathed life into every living being. Now it is moving through you because you have made yourself available. This is living from presence. And over time, you will notice something deeply beautiful. The more you live from the inner, the less the outer troubles you. Not because life becomes perfect, but because you no longer expect the outer world to be your source of security, love, joy, or fulfillment. You live from the kingdom within, and the outer becomes an expression, not a cause, a reflection, not a foundation, a shadow of the reality alive in your consciousness. My friends, this is the spiritual life. This is the life Jesus lived. This is the life Joel Goldsmith revealed. This is the life that becomes yours when presence is recognized. And when recognition becomes your way of being, let us rest now, even for a breath, in this quiet realization. The presence within me is the only reality, and the outer world will reveal what I recognize within. This is how the inner becomes the outer. This is how grace becomes visible. This is how the infinite expresses itself in form. My friends, as we come to the close of this message, let us return to the simplicity with which it began. Let us return to the still point within the kingdom that Jesus spoke of, the presence that Joel Goldsmith dedicated his life to revealing, the reality that has been quietly inviting you home throughout these words. If you have heard anything today, let it be this. You do not need to go anywhere to find God. You need only turn within. You do not need to earn the presence. It is already yours. You do not need to perfect yourself to deserve it. It lives at the center of your being. You do not need to wait until you are more spiritual, more disciplined, more worthy. The kingdom is present now, fully, wholly, completely. All that is required is recognition. Recognition is not effort. Recognition is not performance. Recognition is not striving. Recognition is simply remembering what you truly are, a spiritual being, an expression of the infinite, a branch of the living vine, a place where God is being God. Each time you turn within, each time you enter the silence, each time you rest in the awareness that the presence is here, now, you are returning to the kingdom within. And from that kingdom, life flows with a new rhythm. a rhythm not shaped by fear or effort, but by grace. As we close, let us set aside all concern for the outer world. Let us release every temptation to seek God as a remedy for problems. Let us surrender the need to fix, change, or control life. Let us return gently, quietly to the truth. The presence is here, the kingdom is within, and I am one with it. In that recognition, all fear dissolves. In that recognition, all struggle ends. In that recognition, all things are added not because we seek them, but because we have sought first the reality behind all things. My friends, wherever you walk after this moment, wherever you go, whatever tasks, conversation, décision, or challenges await, remember this: you carry the kingdom with you, you live in God, and God lives as you. You are never alone, never separate, never outside the embrace of the infinite presence. The path forward is simple, not easy in the world sense, but simple in truth. Turn within, recognize the presence, rest in the silence, let grace reveal your life. This is the infinite way. This is the teaching of the Christ. This is the life of the Spirit. And this, my friends, is the home you have been seeking. Let us close in quiet recognition. Where I am, God is. Where God is, all is well. And this truth goes before me, now and forever.